Hello and welcome back to my channel, and hello, welcome to those who are new here. My name's Nicole. I'm the founder here at Witch Be Well, and I hope on this channel you'll find lots of interesting things to support you on your holistic wellness journey. I am studying clinical herbalism, so I like to share things about plant medicine and nature spirituality, a little bit about cyclic living and how we can live more according to nature's rhythms, and I sprinkle in some witchy practices that I think support my overall wellness in the hopes that they might be interesting to you as well. So welcome along my journey. If you're new here, please subscribe, get some notifications when I have some new videos, and consider following me on other platforms. Today, we're going to be talking about the Wheel of the Year, and I think this can be a really great way to incorporate cyclic living. So let's jump right in. So I'm outside enjoying my coffee this morning, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to share a little bit about the Wheel of the Year. And I couldn't help but record the video outside because we're obviously talking about things in nature with the Wheel of the Year. So forgive the background noise, but I think it's a much kinder aesthetic than inside the house. So what is the Wheel of the Year? So if you've never heard of it, it is 8 seasonal holidays that occur throughout the year. There's 2 per season, so 2 in winter, spring, fall, and summer. And there is a bit of a mishmash of what is on the Wheel of the Year. So it certainly has some basis in Celtic traditions, some in Norse or more Germanic traditions. However, it is not a historical depiction of the way ancient peoples were probably practicing. I don't think any of them were practicing what is now the Wheel of the Year. So in about the 20th century, we have people who established this Wheel of the Year. We have Gerald Gardner, who is the founder of Wicca, and Ross Nicholas, who is the founder of the Order of Bards, Obates, and Druids. So they made this Wheel of the Year to kind of combine several different festivals that we have some evidence that may have been significant to folks kind of going way back, which we'll talk about. So on the Wheel of the Year, at the north and the south, generally you have the 2 solstices. The winter solstice on top, which is also known as Yule, and the summer solstice on the bottom, which is also known as Litha. And then at east and west, you're going to have the 2 equinoxes. So the 2 days of the year where we have equal balance of light and dark. So the spring equinox, which some folks call Ostara, and the fall equinox, which some people call Mabon. A lot of the terms that are used with these holidays are really more newer terms that have been laid onto some of these holidays. Some of them do have some basis in folklore. Some are maybe more accurate historically than others. I tend to use the words that are true to the astronomical events, so the winter and summer solstice and the spring and fall equinox, but you can certainly look into the names, and I can share a bit about here if I do maybe some videos on the individual Sabbats as we go. Each holiday, sometimes they're also called Sabbats, so I will use those interchangeably. And then kind of after the north, south, east, and west, we have 4 holidays that are considered cross-quarter days, or they're basically in between each of those other north, south, east, west points. These are more Celtic holidays. They're also known as fire festivals. So we're going to have Samhain, which many people kind of practice along with Halloween, and certainly there is some overlap in the practices we use for Halloween and what may have come from Samhain. We have Imbolc, which is sometimes called Candlemas or Brigid's Day. Then we have Beltane, which is sometimes called May Day, and it's kind of near the Walpurgis time frame. And then we have Lughnasadh, which is also sometimes called Lammas in certain traditions. And so we do have some evidence, actually more so for the cross-quarter days, even than the equinoxes and solstices. But it is really important to note that we know where this came from, so I encourage you to do some research. However, we are kind of combining different civilizations across time that may or may not have had a whole lot of relationships together, and so we have to know that this is more of a newer creation of how we're pulling these things together versus recreating something that is completely historically accurate. And we want to do that with respect. So I do always share history and folklore from what I can find anyway. I'm certainly not an archaeologist or a historian, but there's certainly a lot of people who do research on these things. So I try to always share that when I am hosting my events for each of these holidays. And it doesn't mean we can't use some of the traditions as long as we do them respectfully and as long as it's an open tradition. So I just encourage you to look at that, but just knowing that this is not a perfect recreation However, we do have some evidence across time that some of these holidays or events may have been important to ancient peoples. Stonehenge, most people have heard of, is very old. It is around 5,000 years old. And we do know that on the summer solstice, the sun rises behind the heel stone, and the first kind of rays shine right into the heart of Stonehenge on the summer solstice. Now, we don't have a lot of things written about what they did or how they practiced. However, one of their major monuments is centered around the summer solstice. So we know that something was important or salient for those folks at that time. Then we have Newgrange, which I'm so excited that I was actually able to visit in Ireland. It is even older than Stonehenge. And on the winter solstice, the inside chamber is perfectly lit only on that morning. And so again, we know that something was important about this winter solstice and marking this time period. We just don't have a lot of written evidence for what they may have been celebrating back, thousands of years ago. Now we see this outside of these areas. So in Peru, we have the Nazca lines, and these are giant outlines of different animals, monkeys, lizards, and figures that are etched into the earth. And these are also very old, around AD 1 to 700. And on the winter solstice, some of these lines will touch a spot on the horizon exactly where the sun sets. So again, we see the winter solstice being important here. We see it in Egypt as well, with some of the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx and the equinoxes and solstices and where the sun rises or sets during those holidays. One of them is just over the shoulder of the Sphinx. We also see in ancient Egypt, the Temple of Karnak, which is located in Luxor, and that was built to align with the winter solstice over 4,000 years ago. So the line shines right into the center. It's also in Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Machu Picchu has some significance as well with lining up with some of these holidays, and Petra in Jordan. So it is not only in the Norse and Gaelic areas we see this, but it seems that these holidays, they at least were marked some kind of importance. The hard part is a lot of these ancient civilizations, we don't have written texts, and what we do have written often comes from folks who came after these people, and maybe they were Christian or other religions, and so it's hard to know with what accuracy those written documents were, because they may not have been the people who were actually practicing these rituals or practicing the honoring of these festivals. So we have to kind of take what is written with a grain of salt, but we can glean some evidence of what people might have done around this time. However, we know there was some salience for some of these holidays, given some of these very old structures do align with some of these holidays. The sun is actually coming up right in the east right now, so we're going to have a little bit of a glimmer and a shadow, but I think that's okay considering we're talking about the Wheel of the Year and cycles. So why are some reasons you may want to include the Wheel of the Year in your life, and how do I use it? So the Wheel of the Year does not have to be practiced in a quote-unquote religious way, meaning tied to a religious organization. A lot of folks who do practice Wicca, which is a religious practice, do practice the Wheel of the Year. However, you do not have to be Wiccan to use the Wheel of the Year in a respectful way. What this really is a way for us to honor and celebrate the seasons and the passing of time in a much more holistic and well-rounded way. So many of our traditional seasons or seasonal holidays that we celebrate are very much tied to like the day. And there is a lot of pressure to do all the things in the perfect way on the day of the holiday. And these Sabbats or these seasonal holidays are not that way. They mark kind of 6-week increments, 6 to 8 weeks throughout the season. And we're meant to kind of notice the seasonal changes and honor that season and celebrate it throughout the whole season up until the next seasonal holiday. So there is no pressure that you have to do everything on the actual day, which I think is probably more realistic to the way that humans existed. I don't think it's that we all had to do everything on the same day. There was kind of this flow of looking at the seasonal change over the weeks. And by looking at these seasons, even if you don't know anything about the folklore, you could just work with what is going on around you in your environment during each point of these holidays and noticing what patterns in nature may be reflecting back in you and noticing things within yourself. So the great thing is it just gives us time points to notice what's going on in the world around us, so it can ground us, it can connect us back to nature, and it also gives us a sense of rhythm in our life because each seasonal holiday comes with its own themes, its own kind of gifts of reflection versus action, and things that we can look within ourselves to learn about. And they're very much up and down, outward, inward. And so when you do the whole year, you kind of access all parts of yourself and give yourself both time to rest and time to be outward. And the nice thing is, a lot of times, those more inward times, whether it's during the winter, I think we naturally have this feeling like we want to like burrow and nest and like stay within ourselves and be at home and tend to ourselves and our families. Yet the culture predominantly in the winter, especially in December, is very like outward and doing, and it's so busy, and that can feel very, very off-putting, and some people don't really know why. And there might be something to this where the earth is naturally sleeping during that time, right? The leaves are falling or they're already gone, and they're going to nourish their roots so that they can then spring ahead in spring. And we're not separate from that rhythm. So that's just like one example where we can see how this cyclic seasonal living, when we look to nature to see what she is doing, we can reflect that back in ourselves. And a lot of times that gives us a lot of reason to have gentleness and kindness with ourselves when we don't maybe feel aligned with the pressures and the things that are more to be done in the culture that we live in, especially in the United States. So it gives us a grounding point and like a reassurance. It also always shows that there's always a new season and a new cycle ready to begin. There's always an opportunity for a new beginning, which can feel very uplifting. And for a lot of folks who do have seasonal affect disorder or just kind of more winter blues, I'm not saying this will cure that, but it can help give some of the darker months a reason that they are there. And it also can feel like necessary to have that slowness, and that it's okay to go inward and okay to be quiet. And sometimes that can feel really comforting and not as jarring. And we can look forward to those darker times, knowing that those darker times are absolutely necessary to refuel, to rekindle, to reflect, so that we can then emerge in the next cycle when the spring starts, or at Imbolc, however you practice. So these cycles can also align with the lunar cycle, so we can map that on, and we can even map on the hormonal women's cycle. The menstrual cycle can even map onto this. So when we talk about cyclic living, we can actually talk about each of these cycles, and we'll see very overlapping themes for certain parts of the cycle. So that's another really nice way to work with these energies. Now, when we look at the seasonal holidays in the northern hemisphere, we're going to have a certain set of dates, and in the southern hemisphere, it's going to be completely opposite. So because it is based on the seasons that are actually happening. And an important note, I live in North Carolina, so when we're at the spring equinox, I can already definitely see signs of spring outside my door. Now, my fiance is from way upstate New York, and at the spring equinox, it still often looks like winter. So if that is what's happening around you, that is how you can celebrate. I do encourage you to still look for signs of spring. However, for you, you may celebrate signs of spring with whatever resonates with you as the first sign of spring in your area, and that's when you do your spring equinox celebration. So it doesn't have to be so tied to the exact dates. The important part is noticing your own environment and honoring that and celebrating that way. So living in relation to the Wheel of the Year has really helped me. It has definitely helped me reconnect to nature, to go outside and look for signs for these seasonal changes throughout the year. It has helped me with my winter blues for sure. I actually crave and can't wait for autumn and winter because I know it's a time to rest and nourish. And then I know that before you know it, the sun will rise on Yule, which is, although the shortest day of the year at the winter solstice, it is also the day that the light begins to grow until we reach the equinox, where light and dark are balanced. And then from there, the light continues to grow until the summer solstice, which is the longest daylight hours of the year. So I can know that I'm safe during those winter months, knowing that I can do the work, the inner work, the the relaxation, the rest, nourishing my roots so that I can be ready for the spring. And so I kind of crave that time. And so it really gives me a sense of stability from which to ebb and flow, or this expectation that I know what's coming. And I think in the times when things are very chaotic in life or in your personal life, having some sense of stability and grounding in the earth that has been doing this for thousands of years can feel really safe and secure and grounding. And I will say too, this cyclic living with the seasons has greatly reduced my personal burnout story, which I will share at some point on this channel, a video more about my story and why I'm doing what I'm doing. But the burnout was very real, and I felt very disconnected from the seasons. Every single day was the same. It was a day to hustle, to do something. Work was the same every single day, and it felt just like a grind. And I think no matter what field you are in, that can resonate with people. We don't exactly get to work less in the winter a lot of times, unless you're in a field where it does cyclically or seasonally change. So obviously we can't be perfect all the time with doing less in the winter and more in the summer, but there are areas of our life that we can control more, and we can honor some of these seasonal rhythms, which just makes the stuff that we have less control over easier and more supportive. But I also realized that the way I was living was not sustainable with every single day being the same. So returning to this ebb and flow and returning to nature was probably the most profound way that I have healed and worked on my burnout, and still in that recovery now. And I cannot recommend it enough as a way to tune back in to yourself, tune back into nature, and honor some of these seasonal rhythms, which really are reflected in the own rhythms of our bodies. So that is another way that this can really support you if you're feeling that grind and hustle every single day. And I did decide that because I was so disconnected, because there was really no way for me to live cyclically, that I completely changed my life to allow for that, because it was so important to me. So that's another thing that I've gotten out of working with the Wheel of the Year, is that it's so important to me that I want to be able to do it on a regular basis and not feel so burnt out at work that I can't. So I highly encourage you to look more into the Wheel of the Year. If you're interested and you live in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, I do typically host a small gathering for each of the Sabbats, and we talk a lot more in detail about each individual one, their history, their folklore, their seasonal themes, and ways to celebrate. So please join me if that's something that interests you. If not, look for ones in your area. And I encourage you to learn more. Look into the holidays that maybe you're interested in, or the seasons that you're interested in, or just whatever's coming up next. So this video is being recorded. We are technically in the spring equinox energy, going closely into Beltane in the next few weeks. So this energy is of budding trees, of things coming to life, of action, of taking our plans and dreams that we've been creating and mulling over in the winter season, and actually putting them into life and speaking our truth and being out there in the world and taking the risk to show up. Just like the plants, when they emerge in the spring, they don't really know, is it going to be another frost? Is it going to be really hot? Are we going to be in a drought or a lot of rain? And lately that's been all over the place in North Carolina. But the spring plants, your dandelion, your nettle, like, they are sprouting up anyway, and they are just going to try and hope that they can break through any obstacles and get out there and live their beautiful green lives. And so we can kind of take some notice from those kinds of things and use those themes in our lives. So I always like to incorporate journaling prompts and ways to reflect on seasonal energies and how that might be reflected back on us, and how we can live more in flow and more in tune with the seasonal energies, because things just feel so much easier, and it can greatly reduce our risk of burnout, because it is naturally giving us a source of ebb and flow. And there are so many ways to celebrate all these holidays, but if you take anything away from this video, my goal would be to celebrate any holiday is walk out your door, spend time out in nature, and notice what is happening around you, and see if there are any lessons or things that you notice in nature that you can take in yourself. Because a lot of times when you notice something, when something really speaks to you, it's because it's speaking to something that's already going on inside. And that is a beautiful way to celebrate. eating seasonal foods can be really wonderful way to celebrate. Hosting gatherings or having people over and celebrating the seasons can be really nice, but I encourage you to learn more. I may post some videos about each of the Sabbats in a very short way, because there's a lot that goes into it. So I do share a lot of information at my in-person gatherings, but I'll just do maybe some smaller videos about each holiday as I go through, just to give you a little bit of insight into them and maybe encourage you to learn more. So I hope the Wheel of the Year has been something interesting for you, something that you can take into your own practice. It's a beautiful way to return to nature, live more cyclically, honor some older traditions with respect, and dive a little deeper into what's going on for you in a way that feels really grounding and stable.